Alright, we're starting chapter 9. 9.1 is the midpoint and distance formulas. Starting with the midpoint formula. The midpoint we're going to call M. And so it's a set of coordinates, and the way you get it, you add the two x coordinates together and divide by 2. Then you add the two y coordinates together and divide by 2. So that's the coordinates of the midpoint. Now let's skip to number 1 and put it to use. So A has coordinates 3, 5, and B has coordinates 7, 8. So if we want the midpoint of AB, we take the two x coordinates, add them together, and divide by 2. Then we take the two y coordinates, 5 and 8, add them together, and divide by 2. So 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then we have a fraction, 13 over 2. So this is the midpoint of the segment AB. Alright, let's also find the length of AB before I introduce the distance formula to you. So one way we can do it, we can use the Pythagorean theorem. So if you make a right triangle, we know that the hypotenuse, we can find it using the Pythagorean theorem. So how long is this bottom part? Well, it started at 3 and went to 7, so it's 4. So the way you get that, take 7 minus 3, and since we're going to do the Pythagorean theorem, we're going to square that, plus, and now we have to find this vertical distance. So that vertical distance goes from 5 to 8, or 8 to 5, so that has a length of 3, and we're going to square that. And so, recalling the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Right now, what we have is the hypotenuse squared, so we're going to square root the whole thing. Okay, so we have 7 minus 3 is 4. Square that, you get 16. 8 minus 5 is 3. Square that, you get 9. So the square root of 25 is 5. Alright, so the distance formula is d equals, and then let's do what we did in number 2, where you know we're going to square root the whole thing. So you subtract the x's, and it doesn't matter if you do x1 minus x2 or x2 minus x1, because you're going to square it anyway. Then you're going to subtract the y's in whatever order and square that difference. On number 3, we want to find the point 1/4 of the way from 2, 4 to 10, 8. So first thing we want to do, so we have one coordinate and another coordinate. If we want to go a quarter of the way, first thing we have to do is find the midpoint. So the midpoint, we add the x's together and divide by 2, add the y's together and divide by 2. So you get 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 12 divided by 2 again is 6. Alright, so once you know the midpoint, now you have to find the midpoint again. And since we want to be 1/4 of the way, we want to be closer to 2, 4. If that said 3/4 of the way, then we would want to be closer to 10, 8. So we're going to find the midpoint of 2, 4 and 6, 6 now. So the quarter point would be here. Alright, so the midpoint of those two coordinates, you would take 2 and 6, add them together and divide by 2. Those are your x's. And then you would take the y's, 4 and 6, and divide that by 2. Alright, 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So the point 1/4 of the way from 2, 4 to 10, 8 is 4, 5. Okay, on number 4, we're working backwards. We have the midpoint and we have one of the endpoints, but we don't know the other endpoint. So the other endpoint, let's call it x, y. So the other endpoint will be x, y. Well, we know that to find the midpoint, if these are the endpoints, we're going to add the x's together and divide by 2. And since we already know the midpoint, we know that this should equal 5. And now when we do it for the y's, y plus 5, divide that by 2, we know that this should equal 1. So now we solve both of those, multiply 2 to the other side, and subtract 2 on each side, we get x equals 8. Now multiply the 2 to the other side, y plus 5 equals 2, subtract 5 on both sides, y equals -3. So the answer is 8, -3. And then the way I prefer to do this problem, I would start on the endpoint 2. How do you get from 2 to 5? Well, you go up by 3. Then go up by 3 again, and that gives you 8. How do you get from 5 to 1? Well, you subtract 4. Then subtract 4 again, and that would take you to -3. Alright, let's try the shortcut first on number 5. Alright, we have uglier numbers, but it should still work. So you start at 57. How do you get from 57 to 17.5? Well, you go down. You go down almost 40. You go down 39.5. So if you go down 39.5 again from 17.5, that would take you to -22. Alright, now let's do the y's. How do you get from 2 to 22? That one's a lot easier. To get from 2 to 22, you go up by 20. So then go up 20 again. That takes you to 42. So the answer should be -22, 42. And if you don't like that method, we could do it the other way. So let's call the other endpoint x, y. We know that if we add the x's together and divide by 2, it should equal 17.5. Let's just solve that right now. Multiply 2 to the other side. 17.5 times 2 is 35. And subtract 57. You get -22. Alright, let's do the y's. We know that y plus 2 divided by 2 has to equal 22. Multiply by 2. So y plus 2 equals 44, and subtract 2. And these answers match the answer we got earlier. On the back, first thing they want us to do is plot 3 coordinates. So 4, 9. We're going to label that point x, 8, negative 9. This is y, and negative 6, 5. That is point Z. Then they want us to draw the triangle. Alright, number 7 is done. Number 8, they want us to find the 3 midpoints. So first they want the midpoint of x, y. So let's add the x's together. 4 plus 8, divide by 2. And add the y's together. 9 plus negative 9. And divide by 2. So the midpoint there is 12 divided by 2 is 6, and 0 divided by 2 is 0. Okay, let's find the midpoint of y, z. So we're going to add 8 and negative 6 together. So I'm just going to write 8 minus 6 divided by 2, negative 9 plus 5. Divide that by 2. So the midpoint of yz is 2 divided by 2 is 1, and negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4, divided by 2 is negative 2. Alright, now we want to do x and z, so that's 4 plus negative 6 divided by 2, and 9 plus 5 divided by 2. Alright, so negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1, and 14 divided by 2 is 7. And they give us names for these points. So 6, 0, they call this A. 1, negative 2, which is right here, that is B. And negative 1, 7, that's C. Alright, they want us to find the perimeter of XYZ. So in order to find the perimeter, you have to find all 3 side lengths and add them together. So first I'm going to find XY, but I need the coordinates of X and Y to do that. So using the coordinates of X and Y, I'm going to do the distance formula. So using these 2 coordinates, we know we're going to square root something, and it's subtract the x's, and order doesn't matter. You could do 8 minus 4, or you could do 4 minus 8, then plus, and subtract the y's in whatever order you want. So you could do 9 minus negative 9, or the other way around, negative 9 minus 9. Alright, so this one equals 8 minus 4 is 4. Square that, you get 16. 9 minus 9 is not 0, it's negative 18. Negative 18 squared is 324. So that equals the square root of 340. If you do a tree on 340, 340 is 34 times 10, and then 10 breaks down to 2 and 5. 34 breaks down to 2 and 17. So if you do a tree on 340, you get 2, 2, 5, and 17, which makes this 2 radical, and then the 5 and 17 stay inside, so that would be radical 85. 2 rad 85 is the first side length. Alright, so we found xy. Now let's find yz. So So yz, and you should put a bar above to show that it's the length. So yz equals, and again, subtract the x's. So I see 8 and negative 6. Order doesn't matter. So I'm going to do 8 minus negative 6. So double negative makes it plus. Now I'm going to subtract the y's. But first I put a plus sign. All right, so my y's are negative 9 and positive 5. So negative 9 minus 5. And square that. Alright, 14 squared is 196. Negative 14 squared is also 196. Okay, so I'm going to take a little shortcut. I know that 196 plus 196 is the same thing as 2 times 196. And then where did we get 196 from? 196 was the square root of 196 was 14 squared. So I know that 196 is 14 times 14. So I'm going to take out a 14, and this gives us 14 radical 2. So again, I'm changing 196 to 14 times 14. Then I could pull a 14 out front. Okay, and now we want to find the length of xz. Alright, so looking at the x-coordinates from point x and point z, we have 4 and negative 6. So I want to do 4 minus negative 6. Double negative becomes plus. 9 minus 5. So that gives us 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 squared is 100. 9 minus 5 is 4. 4 squared is 16. Let's do a tree diagram on 116. So we know this is going to equal 116, but let's break down 116, and I'll do that up here. 116 is 4 times 29. 29 is prime. Alright, so it's going to be 2, 2, 29. You could pull a 2 out front. And there's your third segment, and then the answer will then be, we have to add all three of those together. 2 rad 85 plus, and actually, the smallest radical is supposed to go first if you want it to be in simplest form. So let's actually write the 14 rad 2 first, and then the 2 rad 29 goes second. So in order from the one with the smallest number under the radical to the one with the biggest radical. Alright, now they want the perimeter of ABC. Alright, so let's find those three lengths. Alright, the coordinates of A are 6, 0. The coordinates of B are 1, negative 2. So for AB, I do 6 minus 1 squared plus 0 minus negative 2 becomes plus 2 squared. This becomes 5 squared, which is 25, plus 2 squared, which is 4. So radical 29. Alright, what jumps out at me right now is that we just got radical 29, and earlier one of our answers was 2 rad 29. Alright, what's next? Let's find BC. Alright, using the coordinates of B and the coordinates of C, we're going to do 1 minus negative 1, which is 1 plus 1 squared, plus negative 2 minus 7, and square that. Alright, so 1 plus 1 is 2, square that, you get 4. Negative 2 minus 7 is negative 9, square that, and you get 81. This gives you radical 85. And then notice the answer we just got is half of one of our previous answers. So following the pattern, what's half of 14 rad 2? That would be 7 rad 2. Let's see if the last side length is 7 rad 2. So this one is the length of A comma, or I shouldn't say comma, AC. So we're going to do this coordinate and this coordinate. So that would be radical 6 plus 1. 6 minus negative 1 becomes 6 plus 1 plus 0 minus 7 squared. So we have 49 plus 49. So earlier I did this trick where I just called that 2 times 49, and I know that the square root of 49 is 7, and the 2 stays inside. Alright, so the perimeter is just going to be those 3 numbers added together. So let's go in order. Smallest radical first. 7 rad 2 plus rad 29 plus rad 85. Alright, so that leads us into our next question and final question. How do the perimeters compare? Well, we already noticed that these numbers are all half of those numbers. So the last thing I'm going to write is the perimeter of triangle ABC is half the perimeter of triangle XYZ. And maybe you remember that from geometry. If you connect the midpoints of all 3 sides of a triangle, the triangle on the inside will have a perimeter half of the big one on the outside. Alright, that is all for 9.1.